Headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
There was an amazing article in yesterday's Daily Mail, a double-page spread, pages 26 and 27, entitled "The Tragedy of COVID's 100,000 Ghost Children to Make Those Who Demanded Never-Ending Lockdowns Hang Their Privileged Heads in Shame." And I was really struck by this article, this powerful piece. And I have to say, I said it before, I'm not an emotional guy, but I have to say, reading this article, I genuinely did cry. It was heartbreaking. And for those of us who got scars on our back for trying to talk about the collateral damage of lockdowns, this is the harsh, the difficult, the tragic truth. And I'm delighted to be joined here in the studio by the author of that article, author and journalist Harriet Sergeant. A very good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming in to share your experiences, Harriet, what you learned in investigating, looking into this. It's extraordinary what you've discovered.
Well, I was astonished. I mean, I started doing this and I started interviewing, and I interviewed as wide a range of young people as I could, from really, outstanding comprehensives in middle class, leafy suburbs, right down to really poor children living in two rooms over in the East End of London. And I was just astonished also that they all said more or less the same thing. I mean, this was a great unplanned experiment that we did on our children. I mean, our focus, quite rightly at the time, was all on the elderly and saving our elderly. But we just gave no thought what we were doing with our young people. I mean, they suddenly had everything just removed from them that they depended on.
And we can understand those first few weeks. It was unprecedented, and the government had to make some very difficult, very fast decisions. But if we cast our mind back and remind ourselves, I mean, schools were shut for much of a whole year.
Yes.
They were shut through the half of the spring term and then the whole of the summer term, and completely abandoned in a sense. And so many, some people were lucky enough to get some online education, but so many got no education, no online learning, no contact.
Exactly. And it had a really, I mean, first of all, it really showed the divide in this country, in our schools. I mean, we all know it exists, but it was really spotlit during the pandemic. I mean, the fact that sort of about 74% of private schools managed to get online learning to their young people, and 64%, because something we don't talk about very much is the huge gulf between good state schools and not good state schools. And this showed that, 64% of young people got their online learning in certain state schools, going down to less than half in the poorest state schools.
And of course, very often, those actually are the most disadvantaged children from some of the poorest families, and therefore, in a sense, they're the children who should have been most protected and most looked after.
Exactly, and they weren't. And, some of the problem was, you can't blame it all on the schools. I mean, first of all, they didn't have computers, they didn't have enough whatever, so that all had to be got out to them. But, I mean, very definitely there was a huge difference in the heads. I mean, some heads told me they did extraordinary things. They made sure that their kids got computers. They made sure they had somewhere to work, and then they got the teachers showed them how to make online learning videos. And one headmaster, I think by the Monday after that first lockdown, he had 95% of his kids learning online.
So that's the amazing news. But then the tough news, and some of the headlines you used, was children falling prey to gangs, drug dealing, and the online abusers. Just
yes,
talk through some of those experiences.
This was directly linked to those young people, of which there seem to have been quite a lot, who simply didn't get anything from their schools. And again, they said to me, I felt diminished as a person because they really depended on that routine and that contact from their schools. And when they didn't get it, they spiraled into despair and anxiety. I mean, there was this one mother I met, and her son Noah had no problem with school. He had, perfect school attendance, everything going fine. And then lockdown happened. She lost her job. She suddenly had 3 children at home using gas and electricity, so her bills went up. She had to feed them. They weren't getting, school lunches, and she was in a state. So Noah, who's little boy, he's, barely gone through puberty, he suddenly announces he has to be the man of the house. How does he go and get money? He goes down onto the estate and starts drug dealing. And of course, he makes a mess of it. He gets robbed because he's so, just a little boy. He gets robbed. He piles up a debt of £9,000 to the local dealer. So this is a death sentence on his estate. So his mother, who's from Uganda, she has to raise the money to get him out of the country. He's now in a village with her family in Uganda and won't be able to come back for 4 or 5 years. So he's a ghost child.
Yes, and there are so many of them. And listeners, viewers, if you've got experiences, you're aware of situations like this, then give us a call if you want to talk to Harriet, share those thoughts, 0344 499 1000, because this is such a big subject, and I fear that it is not being properly discussed. There is a new report out from the Centre for Social Justice called Not Forgotten, and which is really important, and we have to discuss this and understand this more, because Harriet, currently there are some 700 schools that are missing at least an entire class worth of children.
And this is not just poor children. I mean, I had a long interview with a teacher who works in a sort of largely middle-class area at an outstanding comprehensive, all girls. And there's roughly about 1,000 girls on the school roll. So roughly 30 have never come back at all. But absolutely shocking 30%, so a good third of these girls are only coming to school intermittently. So they will come into school for the first lesson, and then they'll say they're too anxious, they can't cope, they have to go and sit in the wellbeing centre, and then they have to be sent home. And she said that a large number of her pupils were actually doing really well. They were near at the top of the class. They were going to go to university. They had, a life ahead of them. Lockdown happened. They had 2 parents in the house, both working incredibly hard, didn't have time to supervise. And these girls did nothing, were on Snapchat all day, came back into the classroom and found they were way behind, were kind of, had comments from their friends, comments from their teachers, and just don't know how they can catch up in time to do their exams, and have just gone off the rails since then.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And the question is, are the schools, is the Department for Education, are they doing enough now to try and reconnect with these lost children, the numbers we've just been talking about?
Well, I think they're trying, but I mean, what I would like to know, why was nothing done during the pandemic? I mean, why was it for instance, one girl told me just in her school, one teacher she saw all the time. She saw the geography teacher all the time, had contact with the geography teacher. Her IT teacher she didn't see for the whole time. Why is it that certain schools were allowed to do absolutely nothing, just send out workbooks, hardly do anything, and other schools were working their hearts out? Why was Ofsted or the Department of Education not making sure that everybody was doing it? Because if some schools could do it, why couldn't they all do it?
Well, that's right. And we were told that laptops were being made available to those that didn't have them, but I think that was very, very intermittent, very hit and miss. There were thousands who never got access.
Yes, a lot of them said they never heard from their school and they never got computers.
And do give us a call, 0344 499 1000, to tell us about your experiences with your children in your schools, or friends of yours who may not want to call themselves, to share this with us, because it is so vital that we find these children. And what really troubles me is that those who were advocating lockdowns, essentially what they were doing, they were knowingly doing, was in order to protect the wealthy middle class working from home, they were actually knowingly disadvantaging the poorest, the most vulnerable children in our society, bearing in mind, of course, that children were the least likely to suffer from this virus. And I think I'm right in saying, Harriet, that the UK, I think our schools were closed almost more than any other school in the whole of Europe in terms of days in that year.
Yes, for some reason, our teachers seem to be particularly vulnerable to getting COVID. I mean, supermarket workers seem to manage, well, let's say were expected to manage.
Yes.
But I do know one teacher told me that in his school, he had, they were all really trying, but he said the teachers' union were trying to kind of hold them back. And he said two of his friends, fellow teachers, got so fed up with the teachers' union and the instructions they were getting, this, that and the other they couldn't do, that they actually left the union. They felt so strongly that the union was really impacting on the children's education.
And in a sense, I think they continued to do that. Even when schools had gone back, it was the unions that were insisting that the children would wear masks, which, of course, everybody knows, the Prime Minister... we all know that masks hinders learning and causes that sense of anxiety and maybe, heaven forbid, is actually preventing children coming back to school.
Well, I mean, I agree. And I think that what it's really impacted on is, and we are only going to see the impact, I mean, in years to come, because an awful lot of these young people got involved with... gangs. I mean, that is what the really dangerous situation has been, and young men that were not going to get involved. I mean, one woman from South London, she's a single mum, but she said her son was fine. He was busy, did his school, he had his after-school clubs, he had his boxing club, his football. He was absolutely fine, normal, active boy. And then lockdown happened. He was sitting in his room. He got more depressed. She said the school just, added to the whole strain of the thing. And he began to spend more and more time on social media. He started following the Instagram, the gangs, and looking at, all these pictures and the rappers, the drill rappers and the violence. And, I mean, even one middle-class boy who lives in Wimbledon, for goodness sake, he told me he got really into looking at all these violent, because the violent Instagram kind of summed up for them what they were feeling, their own anger and frustration.
And I mean, just so desperate.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.